tenured associate professor. He is dedicated to enhancing awareness, sustainability within architectural practice and education, and that's what we're doing here today. Ed brings a wealth of experience to his work, including leadership roles within architecture firms, work with the AIA, and higher education, most notably being a Sustainable Fellow at Kennesaw State University and serving as the interim chair of their architecture program. So thank you for helping with us. With the topic of sustainability can go in 100 directions, so I'm going to try to keep it focused here. The old school definition of sustainability, as far as I know, is a three-legged stool. It's changed over the years, but the three-legged stool that we first learned about maybe 20, 30 years ago was social, economic, and environmental consideration. I'm sure that we're going to want to focus on the environmental sustainability aspect. You may touch on others, but really want to focus on the function of design and crafting structures for environmental performance. More of the natural, less of the waste, and more of the efficient overall. So with that, I think we'll get into the questions that we have today, and I'll let our panelists take over. So please feel free to talk, interrupt, ask questions, scream and shout, and thank you all for coming, and here we go. So first question, we'll go one by one. John, since you're on the far end there, what are you working on now in your area of sustainable design or high performance architecture?
So I'm first of all, I guess I'm the lone engineer in the room. From an architecture standpoint, I have latent architectural tendencies. I'll just start with that. I mean, I'm currently working on a children's healthcare hospital, a new hospital that is being constructed up in North Trip Hills in I-85. We're close to being finished. It is pursuing LEED certification. We LEED for Healthcare version 4. Our goal is certified. There's a potential we might get to silver. It's been quite a project. It uses a lot of energy, and I think that's part of, so you look at it, you're like, wow, that's gonna, we're burning natural gas to make hot water, we're running chillers, but at the same time, we've got 416 patient beds. It's about 1.8 million square feet of healthcare space for children here in Georgia. It's got a humongous handprint, a positive aspect to it, that I think we all, as designers, always need to recognize that everything that we do, there's a negative consequence and there's a positive consequence, and we don't want to do so much to reduce our negative that we impact the positive aspect of the building that we're putting together, the facility we're putting together. So recognizing, just understanding we do have a negative impact, but we're creating positive aspects too, and you want to maximize the positive while trying to minimize the negative, but really focus on maximizing the positive. So I look at that and I'm like, it's a very sustainable project because we're bringing healthcare to a lot of children who really need it.
Currently working on Sonic Cove tool. We offer basically a platform where you can look at building performance in the earliest stages of design to determine if you're on the right track for design being integrated into sustainability initiatives and goals. And so I continue to work on education, background both in practice and education. I worked with Smith Valley for 11 years, I think. And overlapped into education. I was talking to John a minute ago. It's like, that sweet spot of practice overlapping with academics is a beautiful space. I argue that a pleasure just working in that space continually, which is beautiful. But that overlap is so important because of the need to continually understand where practice is headed and continually understand how to relay that future focus and the goals of the profession, the goals of the environment, the needs of the environment and communities back to the day-to-day work we do. And so what I'm currently working on is continuing in that space and bridging my understanding of where the AAC is headed, being engaged with as many things as I can to then bring back that knowledge into the advancement of the evolution of technology as a tool to support where we're headed as an industry. We all have heard about AI and its effects. We're either afraid of it, embracing it, don't know about it, hiding from it. I don't know. There's a million things you can do when the topic of AI. But if you really think about it, AI is allowing technology to then integrate in those things which can be repeated with greater efficiency and with higher quality, because you're pulling from a greater data set to make decisions. And within our company, that's the whole basis of its origin, is to use data to make intelligent decisions quickly, early, before you know everything, and to use that data to your advantage. And I think architecture is at this really interesting turning point and this moment of evolution that should be embraced, to where even our building structure should be rethought, even the way we spend our time should be rethought, and the way we manage our current data and past data to then inform our own future within our firms and within the overall trajectory of what we design to meet sustainability goals, which are only going to get more intense and only going to get more dependent on data. And so that's the space I'm in, and that's what I work on, is kind of communicating in that space.
I think you, Howard, tell us about what you're teaching right now.
So I am teaching in the graduate design studio at Georgia Tech in the School of Architecture. And so one of the things for me, I've always been a lifelong learner. And as Ed mentioned, things are changing so rapidly, and it's important that, for me anyway, to keep up with what's happening in industry. So having my foot in the door in academia by teaching, part-time in the profession, I was a partner and principal at Lord X Sargent, a couple of people in the room here. Then I became, a campus architect at Georgia Tech, where I worked with a lot of different folks and learned a lot from them, because they bring information to the table that I couldn't have learned being at one firm working on 1 or 2 or 3 projects at a time. And so it was a pretty rich experience. Right now I'm very passionate about mass timber. I think there's, and people can debate whether that's a good thing or not. Is a tree doing more good by staying as a tree, or do we cut it down and turn it into a building material? But we won't sort of debate that this morning, I hope.
We're in a wood frame building.
Yes. So, there are a few things, frameworks, as John mentioned, actually, when I joined Georgia Tech in 2006, I was the first lead AP on their staff. So think about that. Not that long ago, 18 years ago. And now it's just pervasive. But just because you're a lead AP doesn't make you an expert on anything. It just makes you a little conversant to have an intelligent conversation. And Sam probably knows this better than all of us. But now there are other framework documents out there that I've been using in my coursework, such as it's very easy to sort of teaching at Georgia Tech to say, let's look at the living building, we'll go tour that, look at these 7 panels, look at what the apparent is, and do all that. But I think that's a hard lift for many people. AIA has what's called a framework for design excellence, which are 10 bullet points, and I have a slide somewhere up there that sort of highlights those. And that's actually a good framework. It doesn't say that you're going to get certified in anything or pay extra for anything. And then the other one, which is we all share, and that's the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That there are 17 goals. We all live on one planet. We're all here together. And how do we inform and educate and create an awareness to that next generation of practitioners, but also to ourselves? I'm surprised the number of people who I talk to who have been in practice for many years. I'll go to the career fair at Georgia Tech and I said, do you know about the UN SDGs? They said, I don't know what you're talking about. Or the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. I don't know what you're talking about. I know LEED. So there's a lot of work to be done in our industry, in Atlanta and beyond, to help create a knowledge base so that we can all do better. And I don't know what slide you have up there. So this week at Georgia Tech, and this is free for everybody, it's SDG week at Georgia Tech. All sorts of activities. Come, show up, you can look online, find out what's there. But President Cabrera kicked things off on Monday. And as he said, we all live on the same planet together. And what are we going to do? Are we going to solve poverty and world hunger by 2050? Maybe not, but if we don't try, we'll be in a far worse circumstance than we are today. So I'll pause there.
Very good. Same. Current person.
Yeah, so my role at Soundbase is kind of multivariate, so I do a lot of different things. A big component of it is working with architects and engineers, building owners and operators to help build more efficient buildings. So often we get involved in the conceptual design phase early on in the project when it's relatively easy and cheap to iterate quickly through a lot of things. We actually do use Code Tool for some of that. And we provide design support through the whole process to help ensure that the project is actually meeting their sustainability goals. So what we've been seeing a lot recently are building owners and design teams who are less focused on the certification. They want the performance benefits of the certification, but they don't actually want to pay the cost for the certification. It's typically a pretty high added administrative cost for these certifications. So we've been exploring some ways that we can verify the performance of the building, have continual verification of the performance of the building, and basically do all of the third-party in-field verification steps during construction to realize the performance gains and be able to actually demonstrate that. So we're using a number of different systems to do that, and looking at kind of fine-tuning the design of certain systems that are not often looked really closely at, and do a lot more high water distribution, very high efficiency ULS systems, things like that. But also, we're one of the roles Soundbase plays is as a advocate for and a communicator of technologies that are available. Mass timber is one that we're really excited about as well. I'm currently doing a carbon assessment project for a new tall mass timber building in Buckhead. It'll be 18 stories of mass timber over a 3-story concrete podium. So that's been underway for a while, and actually that structure will reduce the embodied carbon in the building by about 75% over a concrete building. So we're very glad to see that the project's moving forward, hopefully taking ground relatively soon. And I've also recently been a part of the Mass Timber Accelerator selection committee. So the Georgia Forestry Foundation received some federal money to put towards this accelerator program. So there have been 4 projects selected to get a $25,000 award, and a lot of assistance from Mass Timber Industry Group Woodworks. So we're hoping to see those projects start to come to life in the Atlanta area soon, and there were actually quite a number of applicants. So there'll be another round, I think, kicking off sometime in April. So if you have any projects that you know that are interested in doing mass timber that are kind of in the early stages, keep an eye out for that.
Okay. You touched on your customers and the builders' willingness to participate. So I'd like to turn that over to Ed and to John for a second. What are your customers telling you? What are you hearing from customers these days and your clients?
Yeah, from the technology space, definitely, oh my Lord, do I have to learn new software? Do I have to do something new in my workflows, right? That's been a resounding feedback loop, I would say. And we all know that time schedules are getting tighter, deliverables are getting more intense. The need to have more data at your fingertips, despite the method you go at it, is becoming more and more necessary and expected. And then to have design decisions based on that data quickly in short time frames with accuracy is just increasing, and it's not going to change. And so even with a software that can provide insights in early stages for those decisions, there's still the day-to-day work that is occurring, the requirements and the needs of clients, all of the other things that we do in the profession that demand our time, energy, and overhead. And so what we've been hearing is that we need to find the value in technology faster. We need to discover optimization of our projects in a much more accessible way for all of our team members. And in a way, democratize that data back into the whole workflow of our permits. And so we started to respond to that with reporting that could be almost like light consulting at this point, where you can get an immediate feedback loop on energy or carbon or some of these pressing topics. Looking at whether they should explore heavy timber versus concrete. What is your process towards that? So we're very interested in hearing back about that process and making sure we're making the right moves to respond to it. So I would say that's what we're doing, as well as a lot of talk about carbon, embodied carbon within the built environment, and how it can even be understood within a practice. I think that is a really pressing topic right now. Kind of moving off of that operational side, operational energy, into the material selection and primary structural selections.
So I'm kind of hearing, so I was going to go one way, but just for the sustainability side, and then as you mentioned software, that made me think of another thing that I'm hearing from clients. So first on the sustainability side, they're still interested in lead, but what I'm hearing more is there's certain aspects that they're focused on. And we've got one client who's here in Atlanta who's very focused about the water use of their buildings. Commercial office developer, they see water as the scarce resource that it will become, despite the rain, etc. And they are getting systems into their buildings today that if you did a pro forma, you did a payback, it's not there, even with the rates that we have. But they know that it will be there. And so they're looking forward, looking past just the strict, is it a 2-year payback, is it a 5-year payback, and saying, this is something we recognize is going to be a challenge in the future, and we want to design for it today, which I applaud them for that. So, not everybody is really interested in LEED. This building in particular did not pursue LEED certification. It could have. It probably would have scored, I'm guessing, somewhere silver gold if we were to have done it. But Trees Atlanta wanted to put as much money as they could into the program of the building. And the administrative cost was just something they didn't need. I call it the merit badge as a Boy Scout. They learned the skill with the previous headquarters, and they're like, we don't need it again. We know that we're sustainable, and we're doing things in a sustainable way. But on the software side, what I'm hearing a lot of owners saying is, there's this BIM model. This model has been developed, all kinds of data, and it's like, what do we do with it once we turn the building over to us? Is it any, quite frankly, is it any good to us? Because can we use it? Can we maintain it? Or really, we just need some PDFs of the floor plans, is what, and so I think from a technology standpoint, as designers, we need to think about how are we using technology and what are we using it for? And in the end, what do we deliver to the operators and occupants of the building? And make sure that we're using technology in the right way that ultimately yields something. So I'm not saying that we need to give them a BIM model. Maybe that's not what, that's not what we need to do. Because maybe they just never will ever need that. Right. And let's not give them something they can't maintain, both software-wise or hardware-wise.
So I think one piece that is important that we need to distinguish, and that's the type of client or owner you're working with. And I work for Georgia Tech, we're an institutional client. We're designing and constructing buildings for 100 or 200 years. Very different than working for a developer or public K-12 school systems and or other sort of clients who really are hiring you to design a building. Don't really care a lot about sustainability, but for me, when I was at Georgia Tech, I rather build fewer square feet at the level of excellence and quality so that we can own and operate it at the lowest cost possible than getting the most amount of square footage. And my approach in the story I tell people, and Kandeda is one of these examples and several others, no one knows that the building is smaller than it was initially intended to be. So, I know that because I whacked out a whole bay in Kandeda building. We had a great design and construction team. We had qualitative things that we wanted to accomplish, and we were $1 million over budget. So I took the drawings home, and the team worked very diligently, and John remembers this because he was the owner's rep, and we still had a gap. So The structural bay was 10.5 feet. I whacked that out, and so with some classrooms and class labs, and the atrium became a little bit smaller, but inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. And, you know, we delivered a great building. So who your client is and who the owner is, I think matters tremendously. You guys touch many of these, you know, client types, and some of them don't really care.
Yes, true, yeah.
So, yeah, Sam, as you think about your response on there, is there, where is the opportunity, where is there room for architects and building professionals to be more courageous in those discussions when they're making proposals to get bids?
Yeah, so there's, I think there's a couple of opportunities now in our changing landscape, ever-changing landscape around financing and around all these other concerns of people who are building buildings. We're seeing a lot more interest and concern around meeting ESG goals for larger entities, so corporations or companies are looking around, suddenly realizing, oh, we have all these assets that don't really contribute anything to our energy goals, and in fact are really problematic. So they're trying to understand both how they can efficiently retrofit buildings, and also for new buildings, what's the cost benefit of building a more efficient building. In many cases, for either financing, advantageous financing terms, or for the larger ESG goals. So we're seeing, you know, JLL has spun up a big sustainability team that's working on trying to help these larger entities figure these things out, and we're seeing it roll down across the board. So there's a lot more interest in sustainability driven by meeting ESG goals than from a love of the earth that we're seeing right now. So we'll take it, and you know, it's if we get into better buildings because of it. And we also see some of what Howard was talking about from nonprofits, where they're looking at their facilities and they're realizing, you know, we're going to build one building in the next 15 years. If we can get it to net zero, then our operational costs are going to be greatly diminished for that whole period. And if we do that, and we can have a capital campaign to fund that building, then our organizational health is just going to be better across the whole period. So we're seeing several nonprofits that are interested in building net zero headquarters. The Oakland Cemetery Visitor Center is targeting net zero, and we're helping them with that. They're going to be net zero ready at the completion of construction, and they have enough roof space set aside to be net zero once they add the solar later. But these are organizations that are holding their buildings. They have a long anticipated lifespan for those buildings, and they see the value right now of going ahead and designing for net zero because, you know, they'll see the benefits. What we are still having some challenges with are developer clients who are looking for a 5-year ROI. You know, they'll hold the buildings for a certain amount of time and then sell it. In a 5-year period, there are absolutely plenty of sustainability-oriented things that will pencil out, but the options become a lot more limited. You know, there's certain things you can do, but you can't run the whole gamut. If they look at the full lifespan of the building, or even just the full financing picture within that 5-year period, I think a lot of things do work out a little bit better in terms of building resale value and things like that for more sustainable buildings. But typically, it's very focused on a simple ROI. We're going to pay this much more for the system. Will we get this much back in savings in that period? So we're working on navigating those landscapes. We're, you know, starting in partnerships with green financing entities that can give us a little bit more detail on what the actual full payback is on these instead of just a simple payback. But this is an interesting time to be working in sustainability where there's just a lot of different drivers right now. There's also the federal tax credits. There's, you know, a great increase from 2022 to the passage of the IRA. So there's a lot of entities that are interested in that, but as we don't yet have the full guidance on how those are all working, it's due out kind of by the end of the month. There's a lot of interested parties who are not ready to commit to actually pursuing those credits.
So, you know, you mentioned ROI, and I think depending on the owner organization, it has a different meaning.
Absolutely.
For many organizations, it's an Excel spreadsheet, and what is the ROI? When I was at Georgia Tech, we did the Clough Undergraduate Learning Commons, which at the time was one of the largest LEED Platinum buildings on the university campus, and we had an 85 kilowatt PV array on the roof. And someone would ask me, well, what's the ROI on that PV array? Is it 15 years, 17 years, 18 years? And I said, it's day one. We have tens of thousands of students who come to campus every day, tens of thousands of visitors, and they look up and they say, look what Georgia Tech is doing. I want to do that in my business or in my practice, and I want to add solar panels to my business. So to me, the ROI was immediate. But again, it's the philosophical approach of not relying on a spreadsheet and a CPA to make a decision. So it's a different sort of data point that is just sort of, it's the right thing to do.
It's interesting that, you know, the systems have to go through this gauntlet of an ROI calculation, but finishes don't really. Right. You know, is it vinyl flooring or marble in the lobby? Nobody's going to ask us the ROI on that. You know, it's what the look is, what the feel is, what the client wants the atmosphere to feel like. And it's like, so I think Howard, your point is very great. You know, I've told people, if you make the building look sustainable, put solar panel. Whether you connect it or not, you just put it up there. But you should go ahead and connect it, because then you get at least a little bit of energy. I think that look and feel is a component of the building, and that's why we build it.
It tells a story.
It tells a story.
So John, you mentioned, you know, suggesting that they add that panel. Let's get back to that question I asked. What's the opportunity for architects to take some courage and have those hard conversations? And are there any teaching points out there right now that you could pass on?
I mean, designing, as Sam pointed out, designing to be solar ready. This building is solar ready. We don't have panels, you know, again, we didn't have the money for it at the time. We're trying to find it now here at Trees Atlanta. So designing for solar ready, designing like the developer I talked to is, they're putting in infrastructure to deal with water scarcity if and when it comes. So I think that's the conversation. Is like, first the question is, well, you know, to your client, how long do you expect this building to be standing? Just ask that. But if they say 10 years, then make it as simple as you possibly can. You know, but if they say 100 years or 50 years or 200 years, that frames them to say, okay, well, what do you think it's going to be like then? I'll give this example. We worked on the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Early in the design stage, they were debating whether to use PVC pipe or copper pipe. And, you know, and there was a cost thing. And so I just asked a simple question, well, how long do you expect the stadium to last? Because Georgia Dome's coming down, it was built in the 1990s. And they said, well, typically, you know, this kind of facility lasts 25 years, we're hoping to get 50 out of it. And I just said, well, what do you think the value of copper is going to be 50 years from now compared to now? Because you're going to get that money when you tear it down. And you're like, oh, good point. It's got copper in there, you know, and it's going to last a while. You know, but I mean, so you just ask the question: how long are you want this building to last?
There's also a design question that's on the table for adaptability and reuse. So if a building is to last, it can last through multiple owners, multiple uses, if it's designed correctly. So the way in which you engage with the exterior environment, the way in which spaces are configured for multiple uses, not just the usage that you're being asked initially, that can be embedded in design intelligently from the get-go, perhaps without even having a conversation around it. And then, yeah, well, you know, like this, you know, we've configured this space. The way that this space has been configured allows for, you know, maximum adaptability. If some other tenant were to occupy the space, I could see a multitude of uses that are plausible. And so that plausibility of space, the adaptability of space, is a really important design tool that we have and that we should always maximize, because that leads to sustainability, it leads to adaptive reuse potential, and the longevity of materials you're weighing that, you're weighing the carbon impact with the longevity of the material, you're weighing all of these decisions, but the long-range life of a building, beyond your life even, I think should always be considered in a design process. It's extremely important. And the other thing that, to raise those questions, understanding what question to ask is extremely important. So the length of tenancy or the lifespan of a building is extremely important, because then you can focus on operational versus embodied carbon or other components. But you can frame those questions around the design excellence framework, because now sustainability is integrated into it. And the AIA recently, I think it was last year, issued the high impact areas of design excellence. And those high impact areas all can frame questions that you put forward to a client that are critical to what we need to be doing in our design practices.
Yeah, I think there's, Ed touched on this, I like to use the term long life, loose fit. So that you design a building that can be many things over its lifetime. And not all buildings fit that mode. We do it in firm practice 3, renovated the library at Georgia Tech. It had very low floor height, but they were able to, it was a 9 square grid, but we were able to carve out some holes to create some taller spaces. We moved a lot of the collections out of the building. We increased seating, we doubled the seating capacity and reduced the EY by 2/3. So it's pretty significant. And, it's always packed. So there, while it wasn't ideal, and there were many people, particularly on the development side, when I say development fundraisers, they say, Howard, I can't raise money to renovate this library that's 50 years old. I could raise money though if you tear it down and build a new building. And we weren't going to do that. So again, I think, and that goes back to another topic that's critically important, and that's the topic of risk. How much risk is a client or an architect or a contractor or engineer willing to take to say this is really important and really advocate for those things that that you've answered the question, what would your successors do? Which is always a question I would ask. And if you put in place the right answer, then you can feel good at night. That knowing that Mercedes-Benz Stadium will be something else, perhaps in 30 years.
Okay, so we change directions here a little bit. Imagine you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you're trying to make one point to your brother-in-law, and there's nothing about what you do. And I'm just going to assume that you're all like, 110% bought into carbon reduction and climate change action. So what's the one thing you would tell your brother-in-law? It gets harder after this, by the way.
I try to simplify complex decisions for others. That's, I think, what I've always done. So in learning design thinking through an architectural training and then putting it into practice, the power of design to find solutions to problems. I would sum it up as that. It's like I use design thinking to solve very complex issues in a holistic nature. And then I need my drink.
I'll piggyback off of that. So, we often ask the question, what really matters with your building? Sustainability for sustainability's sake doesn't necessarily serve anyone, but if we can make sustainability with the program of the building, how do we better support the occupants, how do we better support the programming of the facility, of the space? Those are the things that really matter. That's how we can make it more effective and actually something that maintains the building. So asking the question, what really matters about this building is a lot of what we do.
Go ahead, Howard.
That's a hard question. So to me, obviously, energy is important. Access to natural light is really important. I think people are like flowers, we need access to natural light, and we need water for us to flourish. I think the energy thing, so I have 4 layers, because I get cold. So thermal comfort, you know, matters. So you can, my wife and I have thermostat wars all the time.
Who
But,
wins?
huh?
Who wins?
I have 4 blankets and she has 1. But I think, yeah, how do we adapt to our sort of microenvironment is really important, so that we reduce our carbon footprint, energy footprint, whatever it might be, but still do the things that we want to do. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Leave No Trace. I have a daughter who's a vegan, I have a son who's vegetarian, I have another daughter who's a dietitian, so Thanksgiving meals are really problematic. So we have the turkey Wednesday night before my vegan daughter arrives. And, but, you know, you have to be sensitive to a lot of people, and you have to compromise. But I'm not going to have a tofurkey again. I did that once. Sorry for you vegans who don't tofurkey.
And so my reality is I don't design anymore. What I guess what I would tell my brother-in-law is that, you know, I get to help project teams solve problems along the way, wherever they come up, and at the end, ultimately make sure all the systems in the building work effectively, and I use specifically effectively over efficiently. Efficiently is turning lights off. Effectively is use the right kind of light at the right time. And so that's what I get to do. It's, you know, I tell them it's actually really fun. I get to like try to break things, you know, because I'd rather break it early than let the occupants, you know, deal with it. So that's what I do.
And I think it's really hard to get one of everything in the right place and it work
Yeah.
the way it's intended.
Yeah. Well, every building's unique too. I mean, every building, there's no cookie cutter building. You know, even because it's always built by different people. And at the end of the day, it's people who build buildings, and that's. And I have told people this. I think our industry, every building is quite frankly a miracle. I don't mean that in a religious sense. I just mean that it's incredible when you think about somebody comes up with an idea for needing some space, right? And then people come together and they start to conceptualize what that would look like. And then they put drawings together that are not perfect. I mean, trust me, no drawings are perfect as much as. And BIM is not perfect. Wow, you stretch it a minute. And then you hand it to other people who then start to figure out, okay, what schedule do we do to put it all together? And then ultimately it comes down to the men and women in the field figuring out how to make that little detail come together. And at the end of the day, they stand up and they work. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it truly is a beautiful thing when you think about what we as a group create. How it's literally been.
Excellent, thank you. What would you change about the institutions that we work in, or policies, state, local governments? What's a logjam these days? What can you say about that? If there's one thing or 2 things that you would change about the environment that we all work in, not so much the market, but the environment we work in.
So I'll take a first shot at that. And, you know, John talked about architects and engineers and contractors and owners, and, you know, it's a complex process. The one entity that seldom gets talked about that has significant influence, and that's the authority having jurisdiction, fire marshal. That they can come in here, greatest architects, the greatest ideas, and no, you cannot have that glass garage door. You need a 2-hour fire-rated wall. It's like, well, I reviewed this with your plan reviewer. And all of a sudden, the guy in the field saying, I have a different opinion, and you got to change it. So how do we bring the authority having jurisdiction into the conversation very early on so that they understand the design intent? And what are the obstacles? They're out in the field all the time, and the codes are constantly being revised based on, sadly, catastrophic occurrences that happen. So how do we, I don't know very many architects or engineers or contractors who are on top of that conversation. And that's probably sort of a gap in what we do to deliver these beautiful buildings that you're talking about. And I'm sure that authority having jurisdiction at Children's Healthcare had some opinions.
They had some, well, we had that, actually had to do that garage door on the other side. This one is not controlled by the fire alarm system, that one is, and that was a late requirement from the aides, from the fire marshal, that we had to add control, and it was like that. Why? and they could, and we were still like, yeah, but fuck it. So it was one of those where you just bite the bullet and do it. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. And specific, I think there's some on that line of the HJ, there's city ordinances as well that come into play now. It's just, I live in the city of Decatur, and I applaud what the city of Decatur has done in a lot of ways, but it brought to my attention that the city of Decatur has an ordinance that in their development ordinance requires LEED, Earthcraft, or Green Globes certification, and it got brought to my attention because there's an owner wants to develop a building, it's a nonprofit, and like, it's going to cost us administratively this amount of money. We want to do things. They're putting in a stormwater retention system, retention, not detention system. They're doing, and I look at it like, yeah, we should just, as a city, we should say, this is how we want the building to perform. And it's easy to just say, oh, do LEED, do this, do that, and Earthcraft is great, and that could be a way to demonstrate it. But we need to really say, this is what we want, and design to that, and we'll check engineers' calculations, or check the energy model results, rather than just say, oh, get LEED certification.
Right.
To me, that's a cop.
Yeah, and I do think there are, that is an impediment in many ways, and there's, more and more owners are pushing back on that, more and more, but jurisdictions tend to like it because their HJs, their inspectors.
It's easy to enforce.
It's handed off to a third party for the most part. And, building codes have gotten more complicated. These inspectors are out there in the field, and they already have an enormous code book to enforce. And so if they can kind of hand off a big chunk of it to a third party inspector, they like that.
Yeah.
But there are jurisdictions, not necessarily a lot of them in the U.S., but looking at London for one, they're starting to look at performance-based standards for some of their just baseline buildings. They're requiring carbon tracking and requiring a certain heading towards requiring a certain performance. And New York has their local law 97 that's requiring that a building performance standard where all buildings, existing and new construction have to meet these EUI standards, and if your building doesn't, you get fined. So there's some incentive to go ahead and have a continuous improvement model. And those kind of things seem they seem a lot more workable and scalable, to fit different building technologies, because you don't have to do all of this checklist. You just need to do the things to meet that target. And those are the kind of things we're helping a few others trying to do right now, and I think that's the way forward. It's less of you have to do this huge long list, and more like, here, do what you need to do to hit these targets. And it just seems like a more adaptable way forward.
And for me, I would say for jurisdictions in that running theme, this idea of parking maximums versus parking minimums, I think that should just be fully embraced, and to where there is freedom to design within what we are able to design, and not prioritize storing cars in an S2 occupancy versus storing people for better living. So we're able to express the potential of design better within a framework that allows that flexibility. And so I think the jurisdictions and the both zoning, land use guidance that's out there needs to be open to that experimentation and different ways of developing land for the longevity of communities, people, and quality of space. That then leads to sustainability and longevity of buildings. And I would say, that's critical. And then also there's a mentality also, I remember working on projects in doing a few residential, single-family residential projects in Atlanta. And the threshold of where you had to do additional water management, I think it was like 1,000 square feet of coverage or something on the site, and you had to do all these other guidelines. And it was viewed as a negative. Like, I think across practice, we need to kind of shift our mindset a little bit. We're thinking about where we need to be, what we need to be doing, what we need to value like water. Don't view that as a design regulation, it's a negative, but, you know, implement it no matter what. Obviously, that guideline is there to manage water better on site and mitigate runoff. Why not do that on every project instead of build 999 square feet and try to avoid it? And so, kind of embracing these best practices for the environment as part of your design ethos versus it being something to be avoided through clever manipulation of code and guidelines. I think that landscape and that mentality changing, it's happening and it's necessary. And where I see it happening is like the 2030 reporting, the sharing of data by firms. It's totally voluntary. There's really no carrot, there's no stick. It's just you sign up for the thing and do it. And seeing firms now beginning to commit even more this year, an increase in reporting so that we know what the heck we're doing out there as we do each project, I think that's really critical, kind of the sharing of information, sharing of best practices. And architects, I think, are getting better and better at it. So I'm very optimistic about where we're headed in the landscape of design and sustainability.
And you mentioned cars and parking, and I think there needs to be a municipal approach to parking and storage of cars. You look all around and you see these empty parking decks all over the place. Because they were designed at a lower structural load than office or housing, it really can't be used for much else. So how do we sort of design parking structures that can go away and be converted to somebody else's structure? But also, for jurisdiction, so Shanley as an example, how can you share your asphalt? Does a retail center and a church and a school all need to meet the code requirements for parking, or can it be shared? And then you have an electric shuttle that can shuttle people back and forth to sort of economize on space, the environment, all these things. So, you see it in some communities when there are events, but very seldom is it part of a holistic solution approach.
So, question I'd like to throw to you guys is, in kind of the early, go back a little ways and lead, and I know Leeds tried to address this over the years. The frustration was you could renovate a site, a brownfield site fully, and that was essentially equivalent in points to putting a bike rack that no one was ever going to use on the site. It was a serious point of frustration for architects because you're not kind of rewarded for the things that really matter, right? So, and I know with Earthcraft, Howard and I were talking about, my house was Earthcraft, and I actually made money because it was a very simple process. You get a blower door test, costs a little bit of money, and then you get a rebate check from the government, and so there's an incentive there to really go through and do that process. But I'm curious how you guys would see where to go with the certification process for any, really trying to combine these into, especially on the south face side where you're making things a little easier, and try to take the lead model and everything and just make this so that we don't, as architects, it's really easy to kind of get to the point when you do really need the stuff that matters, to get to the point where your certifications, you can put that plaque out there and say, we really did this.
Okay. So this is to some extent, this is a conversation we've been having internally for the last couple of years, where we're looking around and we've had a lot of feedback about lead. That to some extent, some of the points you're just buying points, Like putting the bike rack in, you know, put a shower in, it doesn't really matter if you have those, but you can't actually walk or bike anywhere around you. You know, it's just, you know, pay $1,000, you get a point. And that's a negative association with LEED. LEED does a lot of other good things, and, you know, LEED has helped a lot on VOCs and other things that become industry standards. But it is a difficulty, and how do you balance those components? And so that we are looking more towards the performance-based certifications aligned with kind of requirements and best practices. So you're not necessarily chasing points, but you do have a set of best practices. You know, all these things need to be considered in the design approach, and that's just the basic part. And then the certification is awarded by achieving some of these goals. You know, this target of EUI, or limiting runoff to this amount, or any of these kind of aspects that are we're codifying some of these best practices and having them kind of ratchet down a little bit over a time period, instead of having a very long checklist where you have to do all these things. And some of them are easy, some of them are really complex and difficult, but they have a similar value to the overall system. That's the only way that we can kind of come up with to make these systems make more sense, and then also providing more support around how to actually implement those best practices, building out better tools to kind of help architects and engineers actually complete those to an acceptable level on projects is something that we're definitely having conversations around internally with our EarthCraft certifications and other certifications that we provide the administration and testing for. So that's kind of what we're looking at, and I'd be really interested to hear what everybody else is thinking about as well.
I mean, what you mentioned about the points, yeah, I mean, it's just anytime you have a rating system like that, anytime and it's step functions, effectively, you're going to have weirdness in there. And from my approach with a client would be, if they come to me and they say, we want to be LEED Silver, and that's all they care about is getting LEED Silver, well, I will help map the lowest cost way to get to LEED Silver. And it probably has very little of code tool, and energy modeling involved in it. It probably does have a bike rack and things like that. And there are clients who come to me, and that's the way it can. Actually, one of the very first ones, not the first one, the first one came to me, they were 95% CGs, and they're like, we got to get the LEED. And there's a developer, office building developer, and we ended up being LEED Silver, but I literally came up with a LEED credit cost matrix. And we ranked the costs, and we went lowest to highest, and the developer said, nothing below this line, and we did everything above it, we got to the silver. That same client is the one that now puts in water reclamation systems and, non-potable water systems to flush toilets. So, yeah, they started with, we just want to get, because we heard about this thing called LEED, and we want that, right? And now they're doing things not because they have the payback, because they see that there will become a need for that. Which I think is a great story for them. They went from being at the tail end of the arrow to somewhere close to the tip, but not at the tip. They're not there yet. They're not doing living buildings. But I think the performance thing is really, it's what's important to that client. They say, hey, I want to minimize operational costs. Well, I'm pushing LEED to the side, like, okay, let's focus on that, And let's look at your building, let's look at your finishes, right? Because that's part of your operational costs. Painting the breaker, you don't even done painting.
And to kind of piggyback on that as well, what we have been seeing more and more is with these certifications, the biggest component of it is really education. If you were looking at a certification or you're trying to build out that higher performing building, there's usually a lot of education that has to happen even for the design team, certainly for the owner and the operator, just so that they can start to see more of these trade-offs to make these decisions. There's a lot of context that we need to provide to really get them to understand what the decision is that they're making and the value of it early versus the cost of it later. And that's, a good, that I feel like the ILFI certifications, living building challenge, like core building, their zero carbon, zero energy certifications, they have a really kind of robust educational component to them, both for the design teams, but also as part of their mission. ILFI's mission is to kind of spread the word about these things, and that's really helpful to actually understand the value of these things and why you need to complete or why you need to do this instead of just it's on a worksheet and either figures out and we're going to move on. That helps not just on that building, but on the next 10, for the lifetime of that client, they have a better understanding of what the systems are for and what the benefit of it is.
John, can you go to the SDG slide for a moment? Yeah. So, back the other way maybe. But, LEAG has served a great purpose. There we go. 25 years ago, we weren't talking about this. It was just intuition about, we need to have, sun shading on the southeast and west facades of Atlanta, Georgia, and you want to have good insulation. But now there's it became a good vehicle to help make informed decisions. I think if the USGBC, ideally it would sunset at some point in time, and the UN SDGs are really what needs to be embraced. Because there's more than just buildings. You can look at these 17 SDGs, and each one of these, if you go on the UN SDG website, each one has a pull-down menu that has detailed, specific information and actions that one needs to do to begin to move the needle. And I think we as design professionals and owners have an obligation to our societies to help make the world a better place. And we're not going to do that by doing LEED Platinum buildings, in my opinion. And like I said, LEED's been great. Why they chose precious metals as their recognition for sustainability, I don't know. It's a conversation for another day. But I think this framework here can help guide what we're doing. We talked about education, we talked about lots of different things, but poverty, how do we deal with food insecurities? There's so many things. And as design and construction professionals, it's sort of in our DNA to sort of do the right thing. And this helps define avenues where we can have impact and influence.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, like, all of the rating systems, all of the programs you could go through for increasing performance or increasing awareness of materials, I think they're critical for their ripple effects. So yeah, there's, within each of them, you could pick out something that you would throw out the system for. I've heard many people, even educators, throw out whole rating systems, say, oh, it's just a point system, you can pay to get to this level. The end effect, though, right, is a shift in mentality, a shift in education on the client side for what we can do. And next time, let's not just pay for it, let's integrate it into our dialogue, let's integrate it into our call for proposals and our request for qualifications. And I think that ripple effect is extremely important across all of these. And I don't know about y'all, but like just seeing the materials that that are available in the market now that were not available when I started practice, I won't say how long ago, but the fact that you can actually choose and decipher and make intelligent decisions now in the material palette, all the way down to interiors, with confidence and with validated third-party verification is a direct result of these programs being out there and pushing the envelope. And I think Living Futures, of course, is at the tip of the spear on this. And I even see some of that language like resonating like with Cal Green and like on-site combustibles, and also the net zero definitions. All of these, it's kind of echoing through, and this ripple effect is coming back all the way to the jurisdictions and codes and what we have to build. So it's, in the near term, it's a bike rack, but in the long term, it is seismic in terms of the shift in availability of options and design opportunities.
Thank you. And thanks for the question, Brian. I have one more question and then I'll turn it over to the audience.
My next question is, John, you mentioned all the different people involved with building a building, and as a city planner, I've always been amazed at that. And not everybody comes up in formal training, in a formal education program that gets into making big decisions about buildings. So for the four of you, when do we catch people in critical education around what we're talking about here, sustainable building and sustainable communities? What are the different options? What are the low hanging fruit? What's the most critical?
When they learn how to use a spoon. I mean, you have to sort of change the mindset and the culture, and the sooner you can start that, the more impact we individually or collectively can have. If you're waiting for someone to get a degree or take a test and do something, it's a lot harder. You're swimming uphill.
As early as possible, and South Bay has a long history of working to educate around sustainability and just better building practices, not just sustainability to energy efficiency, but with healthier buildings, with healthier landscapes, with better, more connected communities. And it was one of the key components of our success. I mean, we really meet people where they are. We don't ask that they come to us with a degree and with years of experience with us, but we really work to try and make these things approachable and accessible to anyone. So that has worked well for us because it really does take everyone. It takes a community approach to really make a difference in terms of using less energy, producing less waste. But whenever you can come to it, is the right thing.
I think two intense learning conditions that we can always encourage, that it meets people where they are. It's density and diversity. I would throw travel in there too. But basically the ability for people to be in spaces, physical space, with others, and in close proximity, not in the car. I think it's critical to understanding what we're talking about, because you can begin to see others as human beings versus occupants of something. And so as we continue to invest in sustainability, this idea of equity, access, urbanism, density at whatever scale fits, it is an educational tool. It's generational as an educational tool. And the built environment has that ability, which is fascinating, which gets back to it's amazing anything gets built. But then when multiple things get built underneath a singular plan that is thought out and considerate of the public space as well as the private space, that's when we're really making progress and we're educating new generations towards the benefit of building correctly. And then when they inhabit a building that is easy to use, comfortable to be in, whether it's 4 blankets or 1, then it becomes part of their understanding of what architecture is and what buildings can do to temper interior and exterior space. But understanding that those two are intimately related. So you definitely have to meet people where they are, and I think architecture meets people where they are daily, and it's the most amazing tool for that. And it also, there's different intensities. So when you first lift a spoon, there's the environment you're raised within, to be considerate of the things you use, the things you consume, the environment of your household, the nurturing space that you're in. But then, Ray Anderson locally is an example. Later in life, after having a whole trajectory within profit-driven and market-driven enterprise, coming to the point that, oh my God, I need to change what I do. So the education occurred there for him through experience and much later in life. So I think those opportunities are out there within the build industry and within the material manufacturing space if people listen and pay attention to their environment. And it's really up to us to intensify that learning environment.
That's great stuff, thank you. Any other questions?
So I'm going to wind up in a second, because it's actually kept me up last night. So, acting environmentally is obviously kind of a holistic approach. We start with the three legs: culture, economic. We can look at the chart behind you and see peace, justice, strong institutions, and this is a conversation we're talking about city planners, permitting officials, designers, clients, everything. I hope you have a lot of answer to this, but we are facing the possibility, and I'll say it name, of Donald Trump being elected president, and then to show he's not interested in peacefully leaving. So for conceivably, if he wins, he could be in power forever. And he is actively hostile, his supporters are actively hostile to solving these real problems. I'm not going to call it dead. These are real problems that have to be solved. So I hope you guys can share some of the thoughts you have and strategies to keep moving this forward in that eventuality, which looks to be about a 50-50 eventuality.
Wow, Nathan.
I'll start. And because I've got kids and they've said, well, what happens if Trump wins? Like, we'll survive. You know, all we can do is what's right in front of us. All we can do is solve the problems right in front of us. I can't control the election. You know, I mean, I can vote. And I'll vote in the way that I want to vote. But you know, I can solve what's right in front of me. And I think that's what we just have to stay focused on. The challenges that we have at home, at work, in what we do, our practice, everything. And that's all we can do. And it's the only optimistic way to look at it. Is I'm going to solve the problems that I can focus on. It's my circle of control is what I'm going to focus on. I've got circle of concern and circle of influence. You know, but I'm going to focus on what I can control. You know, I'm going to focus on the things that are right literally in my backyard.
I think another area for optimism is that while the regime in America might change, we still live in a global community, and there are a lot of reasons to move towards sustainable practices that are not just coming down from the government. So there's a lot of market forces that are making this very clear that sustainability is a good option. You can lower your utility costs, you can have a more robust organization by just cutting operational costs. So there's, I think, a lot of things to be hopeful for in the same vein, and we'll all do what we can to keep it going forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure, this morning we can solve world peace, but, the presidential election is the only election in the United States that's not determined by popular vote. It's the Electoral College. So, I think you mentioned a little bit of policymakers. So what can policymakers do to perhaps change that conversation? And it was something that was devised a couple hundred years ago, but may or may not be appropriate in the where we live today and how we live today. Governors, senators, mayors, it's all popular vote. Your vote matters. One person, one vote. So the Electoral College, I don't think it's no longer the perfect system that it was designed to be. So maybe you can advocate to your public policy folks and your elected officials to say, talk about hard work. That would be extremely hard work to do, but I think the world would be a better place. Because I don't know of other countries that, where popular vote isn't the determining who the leaders are. But that's a few beers conversation.
I think my optimism comes from our past experience of seeing an individual in office who pulled the U.S. out of agreements globally. My biggest fear at that point was this is because we're always kind of we have implemented or at least shown guiding principles that other nations look to and try And so my concern was that by withdrawing from the climate accord and moving the U.S. out of an agreement that had global benefits to developing countries as well as developed countries, and showed that we had to share responsibility for what we've done globally to the earth. That beautiful agreement, pulling out of that, I was extremely concerned that it would have a ripple effect. It would have a cascading effect of other countries stepping away from it. And what I saw instead was countries remaining within it, remaining true to their guidelines, and then in practice, many organizations staying focused on that agreement through that period, that 4-year period. And then the return to that platform, the return to that stage, I think is really important. And the effect on our industry right now, the electrification of the whole portfolio of projects by these larger groups and companies, based on their review, based on their social governance and their performance criteria of their portfolio. That's going to be a very hard thing to turn around because it's becoming, if not has become, a business model. And because we were very much driven through economic gain and economic models, I think it is continually being proven and reinforced that being efficient is leaning back on the economy, and I think that will continue. I'm very hopeful in that, but I have optimism that I pulled from the last experience into this one. But if it goes on forever, I think it would have a negative effect in terms of withdrawing from everything and changing markets. But right now, I think markets survive through these 4-year periods, or whatever periods we get. They've proven to be resilient and to track towards an optimistic future.
So, ADC is about promoting good design in Atlanta. So we really haven't touched much on what's going on in Atlanta, and just give us your thoughts on what projects are kind of, it could be, we're really focusing a lot on buildings, but there's also the sustainability of communities and design. And so talk about projects you're seeing out there in your work, or just even casual observation that you're kind of getting excited about where things are headed and what's going on kind of the next chapter. How, if someone were to be coming from out of town, coming to Atlanta and say, I really want to get an idea of what Atlanta is doing, where you send them?
I got two. I'll go quick.
Start.
I'll start. So the Jamestown property where they've just done the mass timber with local sourced wood, that kind of stewardship, looking at both sourcing, construction, development, and then also having a developer who cares about design and aesthetic. I think that's it's fantastic to see, and I would encourage people to see it. Meanwhile, right next to it, we have urban infrastructure that is supporting community through the Beltline, and then a building that fully embraces it through Pond City Market. So I would say that's kind of like a center to definitely observe, and then to witness the design integrity of projects that are being built just down from that as you move towards Freedom Parkway and the Carter Center. That zone right there just demonstrates a very positive, very Atlanta future, which is extremely exciting. As well as the water management around there is fantastic with the park. I mean, that whole zone, you can just sit there and study it for its urban and design qualities that speak to this place more than any other place. So I would say that'd be my kind of go-to.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the Stitch is one of the pretty exciting potential. Look at the Fifth Street Bridge, the Steve Barron tell you're on a bridge, and you just imagine that across multiple blocks and even stretching on, just that. Cars are a vehicle for moving around literally, but they're not, it's not it's not what Atlanta is. I mean, it's what in the 80s we were known for, but it's not who we are, you know, as it's. So you know, just that idea of covering that up, they're still necessary. Those pieces are still necessary, but you know, recreating the communities will never completely recreate the community that existed before the connector went through. I mean, that's lost forever. But at least we can do a little bit of repair.
I mean, to me, there's still a lot of reconciliation that needs to happen in Atlanta from all the redlining. And yeah, I've been in Atlanta a long time. It never dawned on me why a street changed names when you just crossed over. Now I understand it because it was black communities and white communities, and white communities didn't want black people living on the same street as they lived on. You know, the connector sort of was very divisive. And this still happens throughout our city. Yesterday morning I was at the Midtown Alliance annual meeting. I don't know if anyone was there, but you know, there's a lot of conversation about quantity of what's being built in Midtown, and less so about quality, with the exception of the CEO of the Woodruff Arts Center talking about placemaking and green space and doing some things that are giving back to the community rather than taking from the community. But everything else is like, you know, well, my building is going to be the tallest one we built in 30 years. Well, yeah, but is it beautiful? I don't know. You know, you design a Chrysler building, then go for it. But if you're designing just a spec office building or more housing with balconies, you know, parking podium, you know, when we did, I'm not saying everything Georgia Tech does is great, but in our RFQ for the Coda building, we required for the parking to be underground. And we required for the building envelope to be the platinum. You look around Midtown, how many podium parking things do you see at street level? It sucks. So I think the message that we're saying and that we're sending is our common space is not that important. We're prioritizing cars over people, and we're celebrating them by, you know, look how we can put a fabric or skin over this 8-story tall parking deck and make it look like art. But it still looks like shit, but the park, yeah, you can only put so much perfume and lipstick on that.
Yes.
Well, it is a little schizophrenic as well, because you know, I agree with Dan that if someone were to ask me where to go to see what's great in Atlanta right now, I would absolutely point to Boston Garden. That whole connection, the Olson Kennedy project with the new city development, it's great. It's a beautiful building, and the way it cascades down into the park is really successful. And it embraces all the things that those Midtown buildings, their parking podiums, just completely ignore. You can, as a pedestrian, as a bicyclist, you can have a great experience. And then if you're working in that office, you also get to enjoy all the amenities with that whole garden and everything. And that is a highlight for me of what's going on in Atlanta. And I'm excited to see more masterly buildings going in. There's an overtopping project, 244,
Yeah.
whatever it's called. Where they just added 2 stories of mass timber over an existing concrete building. That's a really interesting building technology. It's a great example of urban infill, where instead of tearing the building down to get more square footage, they were able to increase it without building a huge amount more structure within it, because the mass timber is white. So there's interesting things happening in Atlanta. There's not great things as well, but I definitely point to a lot of cutting edge and just different approaches. There's some particularly southeastern approaches that I like to see. We're seeing those on the Beltline and how they're the landscaping is really tying into some of these buildings. There's a new Portland building as well, right across from Kandeda, right across, and Crawford redevelopment as well. That's really interesting rehabilitation of that property. So the Beltline is driving a lot of growth, and I think it's a new highlight for Atlanta.
We can have a debate another time. So the Beltline, Ryan, his idea was wonderful, and it really has become a beautiful living block. And there are lots of conversations about transit. You know, to me, I'd like to see a parallel path, one for heels, one for wheels. I don't think Atlanta has a success rate with fixed rail. And why start the most expensive option first? Let's do this parallel path. Let's do something that's rubber tires that would be free, hop on, hop off, pay for it from the cost avoidance of not doing fixed rail. And you know, people who have other mobility or accessibility issues related to equity, give them a voucher for Uber so that they can get around. City council is, I don't know if it's passed, but to give people a voucher for an e-bike. Right?
That's right.
So rubber tires are pretty good. You know, if you go to the Atlanta airport, you take the train plane to your terminal. If you have mobility issues, you can take a golf cart to your gate. So it's a shared pathway and it works wonderfully. I've never seen anyone get run over, but low speed golf cart, it might happen. But I think there are alternatives. So you talk about great things. The Beltline is great. Let's make it even better.
I would add real quick, the Melody that just opened, rapid housing, as a solution, like from top down, I think the design could continue to improve in terms of the rapid housing delivery. But the idea of taking city-owned property, seeing a problem in the community for individuals and solving it through design and coming to a solution that actually, what was it, 4 months, it was open and housed 40 families or 40 units in there. It has wraparound services and support services and training, and it's right next to MARTA. It's just it's a comprehensive way of solving an issue that multiple cities are dealing with. I haven't seen a proven solution from thought to implementation in another city, and I might just not have seen it, but I think it's amazing, and I think if we continue on that path, then getting pro bono design or designers involved with this thing to continue to drive quality of those spaces that we were creating to provide rapid housing. I think that's very Atlanta, and it could be amazing as a template for other cities.
John, I have a question. First off, thank you for the discussion. I thought it was really brilliant. One thing that really stood out to me was, and I guess it should have been common knowledge, but is that all things created includes negatives and positives, right? Again, I just felt like that should have been common knowledge, but just hearing it like a light bulb. In regards to that statement, how do you influence those that you work with to see or perhaps agree with the positive that you see as a designer or engineer, contractor, anything? Like, how do you get the other side who, I guess, for example, they're a government official that, I guess a leading government official at that, that's not an expert like you guys are. How do you get them to see the positives?
I usually work to provide a lot of context. So, when you're looking at a decision, in any realm, really, you don't necessarily know where the other person's coming from. They may have a preconceived notion of what you're talking about, the value of that, and providing context behind that decision, whether that's an ROI calculation or whether it's a embodied carbon analysis or whatever context that I can perceive that would be helpful for that discussion. That's what we shoot to provide. Because we can't ask people to make good decisions on vacuum when they're not experts. If they don't have 10 years of experience and you say, hey, you want to do this or this? We need an answer right now. They don't know. Why would we ask them that? So we need to provide a lot of context and say, we can do these two things, there are benefits here, but there's also drawbacks, there's benefits here, but there's also drawbacks, which one do you need, which one matters more to you, what is the end goal for the project? And, by providing the full context, or as full as we can make it, we hopefully are getting better decisions. We have some editing to do on how we provide that information, so it's not, we can't get them the whole context, we have to get them a limited context, but the more context you can give that directly applies usually helps to make those decisions. Because we have experience with this that a normal person doesn't, so it's our job to help it be easier to make those decisions. And you can only do that by sharing the knowledge that we have.
Yeah, I would say that leadership matters. So if you look at the city of Atlanta and the surrounding cities, Chamblee, Dunwoody, Yorkville, there's really great leadership in these cities. And what I have observed is that those leaders recognize what they know and they recognize what they don't know. And they surround themselves with subject matter experts and advisors to help make informed decisions. So leadership, entrepreneurship, vision, willing to take some risk. Andre Dickens, I used to play basketball with him. For me, basketball is the perfect metaphor for business. And because if you want to win, you have to make your teammates better. If you don't, you won't win. And your chances of success are increased if you have LeBron James or Steph Curry on your team as well. So how do you acknowledge the fact that you're not the subject matter expert? There's someone smarter than me. So how do I do that? And I've collaborated with all these guys up here and folks in the audience, and I know enough to be dangerous, but I also know enough to ask the right questions and say, can you help me with this? Because I don't know the answer. So, and that takes courage. And not everybody, they think they have all the answers. I don't want to go back to Nathan's earlier. But I think the leadership does make a big difference. And acknowledging that no one knows more than everyone. And how do you bring those other people into the conversation? When you hear Andre Dickens talk, he's always talking about his circle.
Yeah. I think in leadership, encouraging and rewarding curiosity is extremely important. To educate in this space, I think case study is deeply effective. Even more effective is physically inhabiting spaces that exemplify ideas. So travel and incorporating that into the learning process and the governance of a place. If you're responsible for physical place, you should be exploring other physical places. You should also be looking at future growth. Like the ARC just released, the population projections for the ARC published it, right? So the population projections have areas that are going to have to grow through infrastructure investment, through individual projects that will accumulate and create something. And so if the leaders in this region aren't already looking at different trajectories and different examples of where they want to be, then they should be encouraged to, and they should be supported to take time in their schedules to go visit, see, learn, and then bring back those best practices. But I think it's physical interaction in space, which is that anyone can learn from that. And no matter what level of education or experience they have, and especially if you're in charge of zoning, land use, overseeing development and approvals, and then your authority having jurisdiction for review of those things, it trickles all the way through that organization, moves all the way through. If the person at the top has had that experience, says, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I've seen, you too might want to go see this, or we're using this as a template for where we're headed, and trying to be
Last follow-up, and then we'll have to wrap up, but, if you were to take, you mentioned development, but if you guys were to take a tour of elected officials someplace in Georgia, where would you take them for best practice community?
Or rural, for a tour, like take them on, like what to see, as a follow-up,
Yeah.
what I was just saying.
Yeah.
I'll just follow it up real quickly. Like, I'd go to Serenity for sure and look at the way in which you can listen to the topography, water flows, and the nature of a place to then plan for growth and comfortable inhabitation of a place without ruining the whole reason you went there. So this idea of preservation of landscape, preservation of nature, shared spaces, they're all on display there fully in the Chattahoochee Hill Country area.
For the rich people.
You're right. That's the thing. That's the thing. It's just like, it's like, So, well, it's like the whole, when
But
we.
there are models, there are examples there.
When we moved into different design strategies in architecture, we thought they would be assumed and used by the populace to cut down on the cost of housing and provide housing. But instead, only the wealthy began to create the mid-century, movement towards high design houses, where it was intended, at first, these could be models for living. This is a new way to live, but it didn't take off the being an exclusive ownership of a thing and a style. But I think the same of ceremony, it's a model of what could happen, and it demonstrates in real time what it can become. But I think we can take it, we shouldn't ignore it as a model. We should still look at it as a model for reusing land and preserving features of the land to inhabit with appropriateness. And if it becomes common, or it becomes more common, or a component of development that we see is going to be happening mostly suburban, out of the city center, we need to really embrace those ideas and think about them as strategies that can be implemented in part or whole. So I think I would take a tour there and then, provide the cautionary tale. But then also say,
What you learn from it.
why aren't we making this more accessible to everyone? Why is this exclusive? And having that discussion around it.
And you take that model and adapt it or adjust it to allow for the diversity of income.
Exactly.
At new levels.
Exactly.
I think there's a similar model in the Trillis development where it's a
True.
pop-up city, but hyperdense, it's 16 units an acre, something like that. But there's a large area of land conserved as part of the development, and they're building all these units. There's a mix of building typologies, mix of square footages, mix of, a hope for a mix of class of income levels, which then has kind of, but it's a community that's modeled on best practices from generations of developments around the world. There's some English villages in there. They've got a lot of these pedestrian-oriented walking paths and consolidated parking away from the green spaces, those kind of things. It is, again, an area for wealthy people, currently, but as a model for a development model, I think it is an interesting one.
They both were the same. I took my students to Trinidad last week and I had no clue. I had no clue what a film studio or sound stage is. It's 30,000 square foot, 60-story tall, column-free space, a giant black box. I had no idea.
And another example, I would say, the City of Decatur. I think City of Decatur has done a lot. I was born in the City of Decatur, I lived in Carter, so I'm very biased, but they've done a lot to display what they're doing in terms of both reacting to the community desires to have more sustainable space, to have more community-oriented space, to have multimodal transport. We've got bike lanes everywhere. I use them all the time. I've not been hit by a car yet, so things are all great. And the streetscape has been adapted to include a lot of stormwater management measures. So that's out on public display. People ask questions, they're learning about how that works, and it has actually been working pretty well. So all these features I think would make the kid a good example for what to do.
Excellent. Because you can live, learn, work, play there, which is really fantastic. Yeah.
It's a bubble, but it's a nice bubble.
It is, and you have transit, so the more to go there. You know, one would have thought you should go to Peachtree City, that sort of a model, because it was sort of ahead of its time. But for some reason, Martin stops at the airport. There's 70,000 full-time employees at the airport, many who live south of the airport. And transit, well, fixed rail doesn't get in there. But Decatur, I think, is a great model. I haven't been to Savannah in years, but there's a lot to be learned from Savannah as well. So, but at all these places, as I said, you know, travel, see things, what works, what doesn't work, and take the best ingredients of the places you've seen and put them in one bucket. Take the worst examples, put them in another bucket, but never forget them, so that you don't replicate those mistakes. Yes.
All right, well, thank you. That is today's design forum. Thank you very much.